How does the government, how does the provincial government pay for services? People use different services at different times in their lives. The government provides services such as justice, highways, social services, education, and healthcare. Last year, the provincial government gave our school board money to build an addition on my school. When it is finished, we'll have lots of new classrooms. We'll have a new gym too. It's going to be awesome. I'm a firefighter. I think I have one of the most important jobs in our community. We don't just fight fires, we also help out in other emergencies, such as car accidents. Our city council supports the fire department. They make sure we have the equipment we need to act quickly in an emergency. Last year, I needed a hip replacement. I was nervous, but everything went well. The surgeon talked with me so I knew what to expect. She also checked on me after the surgery. In the hospital, I was under the care of a physical therapist too. She helped me get used to walking with my new hip. Now I can walk without pain. I am so thankful for the healthcare system our government provides. Collecting revenue. Revenue means income, especially of a government or company. Much of the money or revenue needed to pay for services such as healthcare, education, and maintaining highways comes from the provincial government. But where does the provincial government get this money? The government has two main ways of collecting revenue. One way is by collecting taxes from individuals and businesses. The other way is by collecting royalties from companies that sell Saskatchewan's natural resources such as oil, natural gas, and potash. Taxes. The provincial government collects different kinds of taxes, including these. An individual tax is taxes paid by Saskatchewan citizens based on how much money they earn each year. Company tax, taxes paid by companies and businesses based on how much money they make each year. Fuel tax, taxes paid on the sale of gas and diesel fuel. Sales tax, taxes paid on the sale of most goods and services consumed or used in the province. Royalties, natural resource companies pay royalties to the government. The royalties are an amount of money that is based on the sale of natural resources. They are paid to the provincial government because, in most cases, the government controls the land where the natural resources are found. The government uses these royalties to pay for services it provides to citizens. For example, in 2011 to 2012, potash earned the province over $450 million in royalties. Royalties on oil brought the province nearly $1.5 billion. Royalty rates cause debate. The amount or rate of royalties that companies pay on natural resources is a point of debate. In 2010, a poll found that 2 out of 3 people in Saskatchewan think the government should raise royalty rates on potash, oil, and other natural resources to benefit the people more. In addition, not everyone thinks that natural resources should be bought and sold. Many Indigenous peoples believe that natural resources cannot be owned by people or companies. Many Indigenous peoples believe that natural resources belong to future generations of people and that the current generations have the responsibility to preserve and care for them. Sharing revenue from resources. Sharing the revenue government receives from natural resources with First Nations is another point of debate in the province. When the numbered treaties were made in the 1870s, resources in the ground, such as oil and potash, were not given away by the First Nations peoples. The belief that people did not own land and therefore could not give it away was strong among the First Nations. First Nations oral history says that in the discussions about Treaty 4, a chief asked the question, "What lies beneath the ground?" Government representatives said it was not important because they were only interested in what was as deep as a plow. In 2013, Chief Perry Bellegarde said sharing is fundamental to the numbered treaties, to lands and resources, to revenue sharing, and beyond. However, the government has a different point of view. In 2011, Premier Brad Wall said, "The resource wealth of our province is shared with all Saskatchewan people, First Nations and non-First Nations. That will continue and there will be no special deal with one group." So the debate about resource revenue sharing continues. Other revenue sources. The provincial government also receives money from the federal government to pay for the services it provides for the people. Another source of revenue comes from companies owned by the provincial government, such as SaskTel. When these companies make a profit, the government receives money from them as well. Other sources of revenue include fees for licenses and permits. What are issues for First Nations and Métis governing bodies? All residents of Saskatchewan want what is best for their families and for their communities. To ensure that everyone's needs are met, people need to work together on the issues that matter the most to them. The First Nations and Métis people in Saskatchewan are working with the government on several issues to improve the quality of life. Healthcare. Many First Nations peoples believe that good health is the most important part of living a good life. This approach to health can be described as wellness, not waiting to get sick to do something about it. First Nations peoples also have traditional medicines and medicine people or doctors. First Nations groups and the government are working together to provide health care for all First Nations peoples, even if they live far away from a doctor, hospital, or health office. For example, in Fort Qu'Appelle in Treaty 4 territory, the All Nations Healing Hospital provides health care for everyone in the surrounding area. Native Health Services is part of Regina General Hospital. The center considers the cultural values and expectations of First Nations and Métis people. It was designed to help First Nations and Métis people feel comfortable in a hospital environment by using healing, prayer, teaching, and other forms of assistance to maintain wellness in individuals and communities. Land and identity. Land and identity cannot be separated. Indigenous peoples originated on the land now known as Canada. Therefore, they are called the First Nations. Today, this land is very important to the way of life for many First Nations peoples. The provincial and federal governments have officially recognized that many First Nations did not receive the land promised in treaties. Since the 1990s, nearly 323,750 acres have been made into reserve land. However, First Nations governing bodies continue to work for the people to receive land promised in the treaties. Although most Métis people live in cities, many still feel a close connection to the land. The provincial government consults with the Métis Nation, Saskatchewan, about ways to protect animal and plant life in waters and on land where the Métis live. The connection Métis people have to the land combines their First Nations and European heritages and gives them a different identity from First Nations and Europeans. Today, the Métis people are working with government to create a Métis homeland in Saskatchewan. The Canadian Constitution recognizes the Indigenous and inherent rights of the Métis people to land and resources. Economic development. Métis people have always been skilled at starting businesses and finding ways to make a living. Today, Métis people are an important part of Saskatchewan's economy based on natural resources and land. Métis people work in a variety of businesses, governments, schools, and trades. Their governing bodies work with government and companies to create business opportunities. First Nations people are an important part of Saskatchewan's economy based on natural resources and lands received by the province through treaties. First Nations people work in a variety of jobs and businesses throughout the province. Their governing bodies often work with the government and companies to develop business opportunities for First Nations peoples. Braden Middlebrook from Niconete First Nation is a second-year apprentice learning the skills and knowledge through the on-job training with Saskatchewan Institute of Applied Science and Technology. First Nations people believe that education lasts throughout life and includes mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual growth. First Nations languages are an important part of education because culture and traditions are taught through language. First Nations peoples also believe that it is everyone's job to help young people discover their special gifts through education. First Nations peoples go to school on off reserves as well as colleges and universities, including the First Nations University of Canada and the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies. Today, First Nations and the provincial government are working to improve the graduation rights of students. Programs in Indigenous languages have been developed at different schools for adults and children to help prevent loss of language. Here, people are learning the Cree language in an adult education program. Long ago, Métis people's education was mainly based in the fur trade. They learned about the business and worked as translators between the European newcomers and First Nations peoples. Today, Métis people value education and believe all students would benefit from learning more about Métis culture and history. They are making sure that young Métis people have the chance to learn Michif, their traditional language. In Saskatchewan, the Gabriel Dumont Institute offers a Métis education program that more than 1,000 students have completed to become teachers. Why is it important to get involved in government decision-making? A voice in government. All Saskatchewan citizens have a right to have a voice in government. As part of that right, citizens are entitled to tell elected representatives what they think about the decision about the government makes. Citizens also have the freedom to tell the government their ideas for making their community or province a better place to live. By getting involved, citizens can help the government make good decisions and be part of the decision-making process. Chief Gordon Oakes, a leader of the Nikneet First Nation, was a citizen who made a difference. Through determination, he was able to convince many people to work together to create the Treaty 4 flag around the Okama-Oki Healing Launch near Maple Creek. For him, this work was an issue of balance, respect, and remaining true to First Nations traditions. Getting involved in decision making. People often know the issues in their community and their province. They may have opinions about what is working and what needs to change. However, many solutions are difficult and require much time, money, and hard work. One of the best ways to make change happen is to get involved in the decision making process that will lead to change. Citizens can get involved in decision making in their community or the province in many ways. They can run for a position as an elected representative on a band council, in a municipal government, or in the provincial government. They can vote in band council, municipal, or provincial elections and join a provincial political party. Citizens can also express their opinions about issues by speaking to or writing to elected representatives, posting on social media such as Twitter and Facebook, and organizing and taking part in protests or demonstrations. Active citizens at work. The government does not always make decisions that meet the needs of everyone in a community or the province. Sometimes the problem is that there is not enough money, or perhaps money is not given to the issues suggested by certain citizens or groups. When this happens, citizens can still choose to get involved and work together to make something happen. Taking action in this way is called active citizenship. It means being able and willing to help make society better by discussing and debating what can be done and then acting on it. Active citizens are ordinary people who work to make the community better. Read these stories about active citizenship. Alana Krug McLeod, Saskatchewan 2012 Junior Citizen of the Year. Alana was selected to travel to the Antarctic on an educational trip with other students and scientists. The goal of the trip was to help people understand the causes and effects of pollution and global warming. Since returning home, Alana has made a video and spoken to community groups. She tries to inspire others to think about their impact on the environment. Alana also works with the Varsity View Community Garden in Saskatoon. This garden is enjoyed by students from local schools and by many families from the surrounding area. Alana shows how one person can make a difference. In the 1940s, people in Saskatchewan became worried that farm machinery and other items had been used by pioneers would disappear. Citizens began to collect and store objects. They also voiced their concern to the provincial government, and the MLAs listened. In 1949, the government created the Western Development Museum. Since then, the museum has grown to include buildings in North Battleford, Saskatoon, Swift Current, and Yorkton. Today, the museum is one of the top tourist attractions in the province. Many people still donate objects, and hundreds of volunteers work at the museum. They also help to keep the story of Saskatchewan history alive. A number of people in Saskatchewan were concerned that there would be fewer trails for people to use in the future, so they formed the Saskatchewan Trails Association. This group volunteers and staff lobby the government at all levels to protect natural areas across the province from development. They also educate people about the trails, such as Katepwa Trans Canada Trail shown here, and the benefits of using them. In 2011, citizens of the Pinehouse, Creighton, and English River First Nations in northern Saskatchewan found out that their communities were being considered to store Canada's nuclear waste. Waste from nuclear energy is radioactive, and the citizens became concerned that a leak could damage the land and waterways. Some formed the Committee for Future Generations to oppose the idea. In 2011, this group held a Walk Against Nuclear Waste from Pinehouse to the Saskatchewan legislature in Regina. They also collected 12,000 signatures on a petition to ban nuclear waste storage in the province. In 2012, the group gathered with Denestian Métis and Cree elders and other citizens of the northern communities to show their opposition to nuclear waste storage in Saskatchewan. They also planned their next steps to pressure the government to ban it. Since the early 1900s, Saskatchewan farmers have organized protests for help from the government during times of need. For example, in 1968, the price of grain dropped, slashing farmers' incomes. Many farmers then took to Saskatchewan highways on their tractors, jamming traffic for 4 days. Similarly, when farmers' incomes fell greatly in 2000, more than 3,500 farmers rallied in Saskatoon to demand financial aid from the provincial and federal governments.